In October 1952, Dr. Harold Whitmore was summoned to a farmhouse 17 miles outside Moorhead, Kentucky, in the dead of night. The midwife who had attended the birth, a woman who had delivered over 300 babies in her 40-year career, refused to speak of what she had seen. She simply handed Dr. Whitmore a leather satchel containing medical instruments she claimed she would never use again, whispered a prayer, and disappeared into the Kentucky hills, never to practice again. The file Dr. Whitmore compiled that night would remain sealed in the basement archives of the Rowan County Medical Examiner's Office for 71 years. When renovation crews discovered the moldering box in 2023, they found 17 pages of handwritten notes, 4 photographs that should never have been taken, and a birth certificate with 2 names written in the same hand, for the same child. What they had uncovered was evidence of the Brackenridge bloodline's most guarded secret, and proof that some medical anomalies run far deeper than nature should allow. Before we dive into these forbidden records, subscribe and tell us in the comments which state you're watching from. Your support helps us uncover the stories America tried to bury. The Brackenridge family had farmed the same 300 acres of eastern Kentucky mountain land since 1847, when Josiah Brackenridge first cleared the timber and built the sprawling farmhouse that would become both sanctuary and prison to 5 generations of his descendants. The family Bible, discovered alongside Dr. Whitmore's files, reveals a genealogical pattern that defied both nature and medical understanding. Josiah Brackenridge had married his first cousin, Mary Brackenridge, in 1849, a union that produced 7 children, 4 of whom survived to adulthood. But the family records show something far more disturbing than mere cousin marriage. Every subsequent generation had continued the practice, not out of isolation or ignorance, but as part of what the family called keeping the blood pure. By 1920, the Brackenridge bloodline had become so concentrated that the children born to the family shared genetic markers typically found only in identical twins. The county health inspector's confidential report from 1934, stamped not for public record in faded red ink, documented birth defects occurring in the family at a rate nearly 40 times higher than the state average. But it was in the medical examiner's notes that the true horror emerged. Dr. Whitmore had written, "The child exhibits complete cranial duplication. 2 fully formed faces sharing a single skull cavity. Both faces show independent muscle movement and response to stimuli. This is not diprosopus, as described in medical literature. This is something else entirely." The birth certificate, signed by Dr. Whitmore himself, listed the child as both Thomas James Brackenridge and James Thomas Brackenridge, the same name reversed, as if even in official documentation, the impossible nature of the birth could not be properly recorded. 3 weeks after the birth, Kentucky State Health Inspector Marvin Caldwell arrived at the Brackenridge farm to investigate reports of unnatural occurrences that had reached the state health department through an anonymous tip. His initial report, written in the clipped, professional language of a career bureaucrat, documented standard violations: unpasteurized milk being sold to neighbors, improper waste disposal, lack of running water in the main house. But Caldwell's private journal, discovered decades later in his widow's attic, told a different story entirely. November 18, 1952. Returned to Brackenridge property today. The family has constructed what they call a special nursery in the farmhouse basement. When I requested to inspect it, the father, Elias Brackenridge, refused entry and became agitated. Through a basement window, I observed what appeared to be medical equipment that no farming family should possess: incubators, monitors, and feeding apparatus designed for unusual circumstances. Caldwell's journal entries grew increasingly erratic over the following weeks. He documented finding medical textbooks in the family's possession dating back to the 1890s, all dealing with genetic abnormalities and what Victorian-era doctors euphemistically termed unfortunate duplications. More troubling still, he found evidence that the Brackenridge family had been corresponding with medical researchers at Johns Hopkins University, providing detailed photographs and measurements of their children in exchange for specialized equipment. The inspector's final entry, dated December 3, 1952, was barely legible. They are not treating this as a tragedy. They are treating it as an accomplishment. God help us all, they are proud of what they have created. 2 days later, Inspector Caldwell submitted his official report to the state, declaring the Brackenridge property in compliance with all health regulations. His private journal was never mentioned in official records. Dr. Whitmore's files revealed that he had not worked alone in documenting the Brackenridge child. Correspondence found in the sealed box showed that he had been in regular contact with Dr. Edmund Vesalius at Johns Hopkins, who had been studying extreme genetic concentration in isolated American communities since 1947. The letters between the two physicians read like something from a fever dream. Dr. Vesalius wrote, "The Brackenridge case represents the most extreme example of controlled genealogical isolation we have yet encountered. If the child survives to reproductive age, the genetic implications could revolutionize our understanding of human development." But it was Dr. Whitmore's responses that revealed the true scope of what was happening in Rowan County. "The family has indicated this is not their first such birth," he wrote in January 1953. "They possess photographic documentation of similar children dating back to 1901. Dr. Vesalius, I fear we are not dealing with accident, but with intention." The photographs Dr. Whitmore referenced were found in the sealed box. 7 faded sepia images showing children with varying degrees of facial duplication, all bearing the unmistakable features of the Brackenridge bloodline. On the back of each photograph, in different handwriting spanning decades, someone had written measurements, observations, and what appeared to be breeding recommendations for the children's parents. The most chilling document in the collection was a letter from Dr. Vesalius dated March 1953. "The Federal Health Service has expressed interest in our findings. However, I have recommended against government intervention. The Brackenridge family's cooperation has been invaluable to our research, and any disruption could compromise data collection that has been ongoing for over 50 years. What the doctors had discovered, buried in the Kentucky mountains, was evidence of America's first systematic attempt at human genetic manipulation, predating the Nazi experiments by decades. Hospital records from the region, cross-referenced with county birth certificates, revealed the true scope of the Brackenridge genetic experiment. Between 1901 and 1952, the family had produced 17 children with various forms of cranial duplication, and none of these births had been reported to state authorities until Dr. Whitmore's involvement. The family had developed their own methods for caring for these children, constructing specialized rooms in the farmhouse basement equipped with custom feeding apparatus, modified cribs, and what appeared to be primitive life support systems. Invoices found among the medical files showed that the family had been purchasing hospital-grade equipment through intermediaries since the 1920s, paying cash for items that no rural farming family should have needed or been able to afford. But the most disturbing discovery came from the county cemetery records. The Brackenridge family plot contained 23 graves marked only with stones bearing single initials and death dates. The groundskeeper's private logs, discovered in the county archives, noted that the Brackenridge family had requested special burial accommodations for caskets that were unusually proportioned. Census records painted an even darker picture. The Brackenridge household had consistently reported fewer children than birth records indicated, suggesting that many of the genetically affected children had lived their entire lives hidden from public view. Neighbors interviewed by historians in the 1990s recalled that the Brackenridge children were rarely seen outside the family property, and when they did appear, they wore heavy clothing and kept their faces covered, even in summer heat. The 1950 census listed 3 Brackenridge children living in the household, but school enrollment records showed that none had ever attended classes. When questioned by truancy officers, the family claimed to be providing specialized home education for children with unique learning needs. What the records suggested was that the Brackenridge family had been systematically breeding and concealing genetically anomalous children for over half a century, creating a hidden population that existed entirely outside the bounds of American society. In June 1953, 6 months after the birth that had brought Dr. Whitmore to the Brackenridge farm, federal agents from the Public Health Service arrived in Rowan County. Their official mission, according to declassified documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, was to investigate reports of a potential genetic health crisis that could pose a public safety threat. The agents, led by Deputy Director Marcus Thorne, spent 3 weeks interviewing local residents, examining medical records, and visiting the Brackenridge property. Their final report, classified until 1998, concluded that no evidence of genetic abnormality or public health threat existed in the county. But Agent Thorne's personal correspondence, discovered in 2019 among his estate papers, told a different story. In a letter to his wife dated July 4, 1953, he wrote, "Eleanor, what we found in Kentucky defies every assumption about human genetics. The family has been conducting what can only be described as a multi-generational breeding experiment, with results that challenge our understanding of human development itself. More tellingly, federal records showed that immediately after the investigation, the Public Health Service had established a discretionary fund providing annual payments to the Brackenridge family, payments that continued until the last known family member died in 1987. The payments, listed in budget documents as research cooperation incentives, totaled over $340,000 across 34 years. The federal government, rather than intervening to stop what appeared to be systematic child abuse, had chosen to study it. The Brackenridge children had become unwitting subjects in a clandestine genetics program that operated without oversight, informed consent, or ethical review. Records show that government physicians made regular visits to the Brackenridge property throughout the 1950s and 1960s, documenting the development and health of the genetically affected children. These visits were never recorded in official medical files, and the examining physicians were sworn to secrecy under national security provisions. The last government payment to the Brackenridge family was made in December 1987, 3 months after the death of Elias Brackenridge Jr., the final known heir to the bloodline. The sealed box contained one final document that revealed the ultimate fate of the Brackenridge genetic experiment. A death certificate dated November 8, 1987, for a person listed only as Baby Brackenridge. No first name, no gender designation, no cause of death. The certificate was signed by Dr. Sarah Whitmore, daughter of the original Dr. Harold Whitmore, who had apparently continued her father's work with the family after his death in 1969. Her private notes, handwritten on the back of the death certificate, provided the final pieces of the puzzle. The last Brackenridge child was born September 15, 1987, she had written. Cranial duplication more severe than any previously documented. 3 distinct faces sharing single skull cavity, all showing independent neurological activity. Child survived 54 days before respiratory complications proved fatal. Dr. Sarah Whitmore's notes continued. With this death, the Brackenridge bloodline appears to have reached its genetic terminus. 5 generations of controlled breeding have produced increasingly severe abnormalities, culminating in developmental impossibilities that cannot sustain life. The experiment, whatever its original purpose, has consumed itself. But the most chilling revelation came in her final entry. Federal oversight has been withdrawn. All medical records and research materials are to be transferred to unnamed parties. The Brackenridge property is to be sold to a holding company with no public ownership records. It is as if none of this ever happened. Property records confirm Dr. Whitmore's observations. The Brackenridge farm was sold in December 1987 to Meridian Holdings LLC, a company with no traceable ownership or business history. The farmhouse was demolished in spring 1988, and the land was converted to a tree farm that remains closed to public access. The basement where the special nursery had operated was filled with concrete before demolition. Whatever equipment, records, or evidence it contained was buried forever beneath tons of industrial cement. Today, the former Brackenridge property is marked only by a rusted sign reading, "Private property, no trespassing." The access road has been gated, and the tree farm that covers the land is maintained by a company that employs no local workers and has no listed phone number. But in the hills of eastern Kentucky, among families whose own genealogies stretch back to the frontier days, stories persist. Old-timers speak of children who were hidden away, of families who kept their own bloodlines too close, and of government men who came asking questions that were never answered in public. The Rowan County Cemetery still contains the Brackenridge family plot, though the graves are now overgrown with wild grass and thorny vines that seem to grow faster than they can be cleared. Local groundskeepers report that the area around the plot remains consistently colder than the surrounding ground, even during summer months. The most troubling legacy of the Brackenridge case may be what it suggests about similar experiments that were never discovered. The meticulous records kept by the family, the government payments, the medical research partnerships, all point to a systematic approach that was likely replicated elsewhere. Freedom of information. ACT requests have revealed that the Public Health Service maintained genetic research cooperation agreements with isolated families in at least 7 states between 1945 and 1990. The names of these families, the locations of their properties, and the nature of their genetic abnormalities remain classified as matters of national security. In the Kentucky mountains, where family histories run deep and secrets run deeper, people still speak in whispers about bloodlines that should have been allowed to end generations ago. They tell stories of children who lived their entire lives hidden from the world, of medical experiments conducted without consent or oversight, and of government agencies that chose to study human suffering rather than prevent it. The sealed box in the Rowan County Medical Examiner's basement has been returned to storage, its contents too disturbing for public display. The renovation crew that discovered it was required to sign non-disclosure agreements before completing their work. The basement itself has been sealed permanently, with access restricted to authorized personnel only. Dr. Harold Whitmore's final entry in his private notes, dated just days before his death in 1969, may provide the most honest assessment of what transpired in the Kentucky mountains. We told ourselves we were advancing medical science, documenting rare genetic conditions for the benefit of future generations, but we were complicit in the systematic torture of children whose only crime was being born into a family that valued scientific curiosity more than human dignity. The Brackenridge bloodline ended in 1987, but its legacy lives on in classified files, buried records, and whispered warnings. In the hills of eastern Kentucky, where family names carry the weight of generations and bloodlines run deep as mountain roots, people still speak of children who should not have existed, and of the America that chose to study them rather than save them. The tree farm that now covers the Brackenridge property grows in perfect rows, each tree identical to its neighbors, planted at precise intervals by machines that work only at night. Local residents report that no birds nest in those trees, no wildlife shelters beneath their branches, and nothing grows in the soil around their roots. Some things, once buried deep enough, change the very ground they rest in, forever.